attempt at recording this video. So, what I want to talk about today, some of you may know this, some of you may not, but my minor, I have a major and a minor on my degree. My minor was in political science, with a specialized focus on international relations and geopolitics. So my education was far less focused on national politics, electoral politics, things of that nature. Much more focused on geopolitical relations. Now for my, they called it a capstone project. At my university they called it capstone. Basically it was our big final project we had to do in order to achieve our minor. So in addition to the credits we earned from classes, etc., we had to do a big capstone project. And the project I chose was an 11-page essay on a global developing geopolitical situation. And what I had to do was identify the potential source of conflict, and I had to examine both sides of the argument, a pro and a con, basically two ways of approaching the conflict, the tension point, two different opinions towards it. Now this video, I'm going to kind of be monitoring the comments on this one. I might, if you post things a little inflammatory, I might just delete it. This is, if you want to discuss, the video's about relaxing, right? It just gives you something to talk about for an extended period of time, but, just make intelligent comments about it. I'm not going to give my opinion on what I think about this topic, because that was not a requirement of the project. I did not give my opinion. I examined the situation. I examined the two sides of the argument. And that was the end of that. So, the topic I am examining, I labeled it the geopolitics of green energy. One of my primary sources here for this essay is a research paper of the same name by Edward DeMarco, submitted to CQ Researcher, which is a great resource. I'm going to read his introduction paragraph because I think it does a great job. And I'm going to kind of get into some points I brought in from outside the argument and then examine the heart of the argument, the agents in this case, the people who seek to benefit from either side, and look at the argument. So, here is Edward DeMarco's introduction. The post-war U.S.-dominated geopolitical order shaped by oil is yielding to a new system built on carbon-free renewable energy and electric vehicles. In the emerging international scramble for so-called green energy, China is leading with its control over many supplies of minerals essential for batteries, wind turbines, and other technologies. China is also key to addressing climate change because its coal-powered economy creates more planet-warming greenhouse gas emissions than any any other country. To counter China, the United States is rallying allies and friendly mineral-rich countries to forge alternative supply chains that can enable green energy industries to scale up. And faced with Russian aggression in Ukraine, Europe is shedding energy ties to Moscow and expanding its domestic wind and solar power sources. Clean hydrogen may also create new energy powers from Australia to Chile and Africa, as industrial demand for fossil-free energy surges. Competition extends into the Arctic, where retreating ice is spurring the hunt for green energy minerals. While this transition will take decades, the rules of the game are being set now in Beijing and in Washington. So that's a little introductory paragraph now. Some background information, and this is some information I brought to this argument. In 2022, there was a 60% increase in sales of electric cars. Electric vehicles account for 25% of all car sales in China, 20% of all car sales in the EU, and 10% of all car sales in the United States. So some background there on how ubiquitous electric vehicles are starting to become, and if you've, been keeping up with, you don't have to be a car person. If you've just been watching the news, you know about the advancement of electric vehicles. China is leading the electric vehicle and renewable energy movement, as seen by the figures above, and they have a stranglehold on the resources used in the production of renewables and EVs. And here's a quote from the DeMarco paper. Currently, China refines 68% of the world's nickel, 40% of the world's copper, and 59% of the world's lithium. In terms of cobalt, China refines 73% of all cobalt in the world and accounts for 79% of all lithium-ion battery manufacturing. Meanwhile, the United States is dependent on imports for all of those minerals I just listed. Now there's a little board. There is what do you want to call it? A panel. A meeting. A panel, I guess, would be the proper term, but a lot of people do not know of its existence. It's called the Minerals Security Partnership. And the Minerals Security Partnership, they met recently at the UN General Assembly, which would have been back 2000, this would have been last year, 2022, the UN General Assembly. So you have the United States present here, obviously, as well as Canada, Australia, Britain, France, Japan, South Korea, and a group of African nations that is collectively called the African Mining Nations. And the African Mining Nations Coalition is the Republic of Congo, Mozambique, Namibia, Tanzania, and Zambia. And these are the most mineral-rich African nations that do a lot of mining exports. So they sit on that Mineral Security Partnership as well. Now there's basically two schools of thought on what we need to do with regards to this renewable energy issue. And it's pretty simple, really, as I outlined above. China currently is cornering the market on those resources, and they're leading the consumer market on renewable vehicles, or electric vehicles, and renewable resources. So there's two as anti-cooperation. Now I will start with the anti-cooperation argument. So this is evidenced. This is a opinion that the security partnership, the mineral security partnership, is kind of the mind of, and this is headed up by Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. And obviously, delegates, leaders from all these other countries, and these people believe that it is in the best interest of the United States, NATO, EU, basically the global West, to not cooperate with China in the renewable energy space, and to instead form strategic partnerships with one another to cut off China, to counter China in the space, to basically become independent of them for renewables. The major stakeholders on this side of the argument are the United States, the European Union, Japan, and the African mining nations that I mentioned earlier. First and foremost, I want to talk about the broad American opinion of China, because it is important. It's an important aspect of this debate, even though it's not the most important aspect. But because this argument, the entire basis of the anti-Chinese cooperation argument is one of national security and economic security. These people make the argument that it is an existential threat to the United States of America and our allies that China has this much economic power. It threatens the entire existence of the Western world. Now part of this, so the United States has viewed China as her main geopolitical rival for the better part of 2 decades. And I looked at some Gallup polling here. 79% of the American population has an unfavorable opinion of China. Almost 80% of Americans doesn't say they hate China. It's a general distrust ranging from hatred to, I don't like them. Broad spectrum, but 80%, almost 79%. And with support that broad, it's bipartisan. Anti-China rhetoric and policies are popular on both Republican and Democratic tickets. And you see that in the actions and words of presidents. President Trump called China a foreign adversary. And President Trump put out a statement saying that China was using aggressive economic practices to strategically flood the global market of rare earth elements and displace our competitors. So we have there, very strong statements from former President Trump. And that sort of language shows the framing that's being used on this side of the debate. Statements like this are meant to increase public attentiveness, and it's a term. It's called highly visible demonstrations of concern. And when political leaders make statements like this or behave in ways that are very public-facing and very concerned about an issue, the public pays attention, and both President Trump and President Biden passed legislation with specific wording and intent to undermine Chinese hegemony in renewable resources. The people on this side of the aisle, they continually use the framing devices of China as adversarial, ominous national security threats, things like that. And that framing very hard to ignore. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he called the now right public statement. He said that China uses policies of economic coercion and intimidation, and they sort of paint this authoritarianism versus freedom as the sides there. But as we know, China is a direct threat, is in direct opposition to a lot of the geopolitical goals of the United States. And I do a quick transition into Taiwan here. But after the war in Ukraine started, a lot of attention was paid to Taiwan. Based on the One China policy and the United States' disagreement with them. Taiwan is perhaps the most important geopolitical country in the world because of their semiconductor industry and microchip industry. And a lot of people thought China was paying very close attention to how Russia was doing in Ukraine, to kind of get an idea of how their potential invasion of Taiwan would go if they had to do that. And then, of course, Nancy Pelosi goes and visits Taiwan. China makes very negative public statements about that. And in a candid interview moment that the White House aides would later walk back. But in a candid interview moment, President Biden said the U.S. would intervene militarily if China attempted to go into Taiwan, which is the first time any U.S. president has concretely said that that is the policy of the American military, which we've known it was. But then, of course, you have the CHIPS Act that was put into law in August of 2022, which authorizes $39 billion in subsidy for chip manufacturers that come to the United States. And it's obvious that that's a way to safeguard our semiconductor and microchip industries in the event that China goes into Taiwan, because Taiwan produces the best microchips in the world. And if China gets a hold of them and keeps them for themselves, everything suffers. The United States weapons, programs, cars, everything suffers. They could cripple the economy of every country outside of China if they took and hoarded those semiconductors and microchips. So that's the CHIPS Act. And that's really the main U.S. position. I want to move on now. The European Union, really Western Europe in general. The war in Ukraine really highlighted for them how dependent they'd become on Russian oil and gas. The prices were going way up. Russia turned the tap off. And things got really bad, really expensive, and they realized that their infrastructure had not been, they'd gotten lazy. They hadn't maintained and built their infrastructure. They took it for granted. And they realized they had an energy insecurity across most of Western Europe. So Western Europe, the EU, they think if they can build these green energy coalitions, they can become more energy independent. Because, if you're in the government, if you're a head of state of an EU country, and, because of embargoes, the gas stops flowing into your country, people will start feeling insecure at home because they're dealing with, they're responding to events and policies over which they have no control. And the geopolitical goals and social values of a majority of these European Union countries align more closely with the United States than they do with China. In fact, who was it, in August? There's another quote from the DeMarco paper. In August, the European Union said that China's control of critical minerals posed a risk of supplies being used as a geopolitical leverage for export restrictions, or for instance through export restrictions. So the European Union is coming right out and saying, if we allow China to curtail the market, to control the market, they can restrict exports if we don't do what they want. I.e., if we don't let them have Taiwan, they can say, okay, well, no more lithium, no more cobalt. Have fun. And then Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission, which I believe is a committee of the European Union, she said, just as China has been ramping up its military posture, it has also ramped up its policies of disinformation and economic and trade coercion. There's a deliberate policy targeting other countries to ensure they comply and conform with China. So that's three. These statements keep coming. They're very in line with one another. Next countries, that's the European Union's position. They see an instability, and they can't ally themselves with somebody that they can't trust. The United States may not be the best bedfellow in the world, but they're easier to stomach for them than China. Now I want to look here at Japan and the African mining nations. So the African mining nations, obviously, we know how they benefit because they can mine these resources, but there's this other group that I'm going to add in with Japan here, and this is called the African Green Hydrogen Alliance. And this African Green Hydrogen Alliance consists of the countries of Egypt, Kenya, Mauritania, Morocco, Namibia, and South Africa. 6 countries. And now Japan and the African Green Hydrogen Alliance, they see this situation as a way to elevate themselves geopolitically, to increase their station in the world, so to say. And all these countries were all invited to the Mineral Security Partnership, which means that the West is seeing these as potential partners and already starting to reap the rewards of this. Now Japan was starting to transition to nuclear energy. Nuclear is clean, one of the most efficient forms of energy production in the world. I'm a big fan of nuclear energy. But the Fukushima disaster happens in 2011, and it is now very, very, very unpopular politically in Japan. There's no political will to build, expand, maintain their nuclear power grid. There just isn't. So, another problem Japan faces, it's an island nation. Island nations, they're at risk for rising sea levels. They're at risk for fish life declining. So, there's no political will for nuclear energy proliferation, but they also are extremely concerned about the effects of climate change. Very concerned, because they will be one of the hardest hit countries. So now Japan is focusing on what they call green hydrogen energy. And also focusing on green hydrogen energy is this African Green Hydrogen Alliance. And they, along with Japan, think that hydrogen energy is the future of renewables instead of electric. Now you have electric cars, Teslas, whatever. They think instead it could be hydrogen fuel. it's really easy to see why. Here's a quote. Sub-Saharan Africa has the greatest potential of any region in the world to produce inexpensive green hydrogen fuel by the year 2050. So these African nations are really pushing these US-led coalitions to invest and move towards a hydrogen future. And, the benefits for them, obvious. Africa is the most underdeveloped part of the world. The continent of Africa only accounts for 3% of global GDP. The entire continent of Africa, 3% of GDP. But, part of that for a long time was political instability throughout most of Africa. But in recent years, we're seeing a lot more political stability around there. We've seen a lot of economic growth throughout a lot of Africa. And it's possible that they could be the big winners in a green energy future, and they are trying to capitalize on that. But an issue here, one of the sticking points, is that Africa is not really anti-China the way Japan, the United States, and the European Union are. China's been making a lot of inroads through Africa with the Belt and Road initiatives. China has been massively investing into African infrastructure. The United States has heavily criticized this. They call it a debt trap. Anthony Blinken describing it as a deliberate strategy to load unmanageable sums to African countries, draw them into China's sphere of influence, and force unfair commitments upon them. And we've seen that because if you look at the opinions of African countries over time, their leaders, their opinions towards China, their opinions towards the US, you compare 10, 15, 20 years ago to now, Africa has become far more pro-China, has moved away from the United States' soft power. And I believe all but one African nation now says that Taiwan should belong to China. So, yeah, here we go. I'm just going to read out this entire paragraph that I wrote. An investment into Japan and Africa's green hydrogen initiatives, coming from the Mineral Security Partnership, would work to start decoupling these developing and mineral-rich African nations from China, who have worked to instill governments that are sympathetic towards the One China policy. And here's a quote. Burkina Faso, Malawi, Liberia, Senegal, and others all switched their recognition from Taiwan to the PRC. Eswatini is the only African nation still to recognize Taiwan's government in 2023. So this kind of win-win move for Africa and the US. Bring them back closer into your sphere of influence, and they get richer and more stable, more growth. Now the fear, I suppose, is that they might take that and then take it all back to China, but you never know. And we're already seeing some investment here into Africa. Germany is seeking hydrogen to decarbonize its industries, and Germany invested $9.4 billion into a 1,500 square mile hydrogen project in Namibia. Yeah, I'm not sure if that lands in Germany or Namibia. I'm assuming it's in Namibia. But Germany gave them $9.4 billion to work on this plot of land. Now, that is the anti-cooperation side. We're going to look at the pro-cooperation side now. This side basically says that the United States should work with China instead of try to work against China for our green energy future. And I'm just going to read my opening statement here for this section. The other side of the argument is far less concerned with geopolitical outcomes and jockeying for future power and investment. They view climate change as a global crisis and one without political boundaries. There are no winners, only losers. In his argument, Merritt T. Cook states, morally, the issue could not be clearer. Transitioning to a green energy future is not an option. It is a necessity. In my paper, I continue. Cook is appealing to both security and welfare with his statement. He's setting the stakes and giving a moral imperative. And I have this quote here from a textbook talking about how policymakers create and make kind of great arguments, how they share arguments and try to persuade people. And it says to be successful, policymakers must offer solutions that appear likely to address the problem. And here is the important bit. As it has been defined. And the thing is that the problem has already been defined. The problem is climate change. The problem is environmental disaster. And the other side of the argument, the anti-cooperation side of the argument, does not disagree with that definition, which makes it a little bit easier. And this is viewed as the path of least resistance. Cook says that the facts are clear and facts can overcome division. Then here's another quote from a political scientist, Michael Kraft, or is it Deborah Stone, political scientist. And Deborah says, in the rational ideal, information and knowledge obviate the need for force because they can resolve conflict. So what she's saying is that if you have facts, and if you're smart, you don't need to use force because the truth overcomes. Maybe not always true in the real world, but in the rational ideal world, true. Now here's a quote. Commercially, the logic for continued engagement in developing green energy products and services through trade and investment outweighs any arguments for decoupling. Market incentives exist for the United States and the West, and the fears of economic insecurity are unfounded. The U.S. has comparative advantage in research and development, innovation, and efficiency of capital markets to bring breakthrough products to scale. China has comparative advantage in the size of its market and the market certainty fostered by a top-down political model. So I'm going to break that down a little bit further. What he's saying here is that because of the key differences between the United States and China, they have different advantages, so they do not have to worry about the other sort of encroaching upon them. It's saying the United States is much better at research and development, which is true. The United States is much better at innovation, which is true. And that the amount of money that's in the United States capital markets, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, the United States has so much money that they can easily bring these breakthrough innovations to scale. They can make a finished product easy and get it out distributed very easily because of how much money is in the United States. But saying we're China has its advantages. It's a massive market, and that market it's a certainty because the government is authoritarian. What they say goes. You don't worry about them changing their mind, theoretically. But let's see, I kind of want to just I talked a little bit about how the international cooperation between the United States and China peaked in 2014. In 2014, under President Obama, we saw a lot of proposals, projects, things of that nature, commitments made with China towards environmental goals. We saw a lot of that up to 2014. But then the last couple of years of the Obama administration into the Trump years, the political dynamics in both U.S. and China have shifted. What's interesting is that in both the United States and in China, the demand for renewables is at an all-time high. More people want electric vehicles, more people want solar panels, wind panels, whatever. But even though both countries have increased demand for renewables, both the United States and China have increased oil production, and in the case of China, they've increased their use of coal. Right now, coal makes up half of China's energy generation. China originally said they wanted to be carbon neutral by 2050, but the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that that's not even going to be possible until 2070, given their current energy production grid. 2070. And then China's kind of come out and said, well, we want 2050, but we think 2060 is realistic. But then this panel says it's actually going to be 2070 at the earliest. The earliest 2070. I talked about how a big barrier on this side of the aisle recognizes is that the latent distrust that Americans and much of the West has towards China is very hard to overcome. And I quote again Deborah Stone, again political scientist. Two quotes from her, one of them doing some cognitive psychology. Studies in cognitive psychology tells us that emotions play a large role in people's political decisions. So people might think that they're logical, smart people, but when psychologists look at them, actually, most people make their political decisions based on emotions, fear, anger, hope, sad, that's why they vote the way they do. That's why they believe what they believe. She also states, in our various social and political roles, we largely act according to prior attitudes and beliefs, rather than new information. So people are very, very unlikely, politically, to act based on new information. It's based on what do you already believe? What do you already feel? What do Americans already believe? We don't trust China. They're an existential threat. What do they already feel? That goes together. That probably will not change. So what I said is that this side of the argument, they have to do work to define their position in a way that can combat prior attitudes and beliefs, which is extremely hard. And they have to break through reluctance. One way they're doing that is highlighting the extreme weather events that are becoming more common, and making the argument that extreme weather is more of a national security threat than China. And that point is actually becoming more salient, and you see that in the polling. Between July and September, extreme weather beyond Europe provide advocates of net zero carbon reduction with ample evidence of a global climate crisis. In Pakistan, floods caused by heavy monsoon rains displaced almost 8 million people. In the Horn of Africa, communities from Kenya to Somalia are facing the worst drought in 40 years, potentially killing millions. So focusing on that, and not only like, hey, these hurricanes are killing people, causing millions of dollars worth of damage, but if you have these big droughts in parts of Africa, whatever, those people have to become refugees somewhere. That becomes more salient. And the polling does reflect that providing people with that information does change their political opinions. And people on this side of the argument think that setting dates such as 2050 or 2060 aren't good enough. And they think the only way that speeds up and that you reach earlier dates is through cooperation. The report describes an urgent need for a significant increase in ambition. If emissions are not reduced by 2030, they will need to be substantially reduced thereafter to compensate for the slow start. And those who value cooperation with China understand it's unlikely to happen given geopolitical tensions. They've also identified a schism between China's stated political goals and their actual policy. President Xi Jinping has admitted that China would have to increase its use of fossil fuels. And China still leads the world in carbon dioxide emissions. I end this part of the argument with a quote. Although there's no world government in which we can all claim legal citizenship, globalization confronts us with questions about our duties as moral citizens in the global community. And one thing I want to talk about, I didn't get this in the report, but today I saw this report come out. I haven't had the time to really dig through it yet, but it said that Biden and Xi are trying to thaw U.S.-China tensions, specifically around Taiwan, so we might see some progress there. Anyway, I hope you guys found this interesting. If you did, let me know. Leave a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel for more content just like this almost every single day. Until next time, guys. Bye-bye.